All right. Thank you all for providing that information. So let's go ahead and get started. Wait till that comes back on over there. There we go. Here we are. All right. Again, good afternoon to everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Trauma and Stress, Emotional Signs and Symptoms. My name is William Moore and I am with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And as your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that today's presentation is brought to you by our friends at the Innocent Justice Foundation. Their information, including their website and how to contact them, is located on this slide. Please note the following disclaimer, and I'll leave this just for a couple of seconds for folks to review. Also note that we will be recording this webinar. It will be linked to our NTTAC YouTube page. Please note that past webinar events are archived on our NTTAC YouTube page. And for individuals looking for supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. For those wishing to download a copy of important documents and resources related to today's webinar, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat pod. Here, you will find the PowerPoint, presenter bios, and other important documents that will help address any technical related questions you may have. Simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenters will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your question into the chat box as they arise. Now, for those of you who are joining in the group, please help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you're viewing alone or by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time. However, if you're viewing in a group with additional people, please type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. Again, if you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. Please note that following today's webinar, you will receive a certificate of attendance. Please note that individuals who are signed into the virtual room will receive the certificate of attendance. Those who are attending in a group who do not have individuals signed in, they will not receive a certificate. However, they can access it if you download the group validation form. Simply download the form and you will indicate the individual who joined with you for today's webinar. You can then submit that form to ojjdp.tta@usdoj.gov, and we will get a certificate to those additional people that were in the room with you today. Again, if you're signed in, there's no need to do anything. You will receive an automatic email with your certificate. Those who are not will need to be indicated on the group validation form. Now, with that being said, I would like to turn over today's presentation to our moderator, Beth Medina. Beth, take it away.
Thanks so much, William. Hello, everyone. I am Beth Medina. I'm the CEO of the Innocent Justice Foundation and the Program Director for SHIFT. SHIFT has been working with ITAC for over a decade. We are the training and technical assistance provider for officer wellness. We partner with ITAC teams across the country to provide programming for their teams regarding how to mitigate trauma and traumatic stress and to educate about vicarious and secondary trauma and help them remain as healthy as possible so they can keep doing the good work that they do. We always train with a mental health professional and an ITAC professional together. We find this to be the best way to give information and present the material to ICAC teams. This is the fourth in a series of 6 webinars about trauma and traumatic stress and how to mitigate. And as our trainers will take you through, we talk about trauma and how it affects the body or how it affects a person over 5 domains. We talk about the physical responses and signs and symptoms of trauma, the cognitive, the emotional, behavioral, and the worldview. And today we're going to be talking about the emotional signs and symptoms. I would like to invite you, if you have not seen or listened to the other webinars, you are invited to do so. There's a lot of great information. The trainers do a terrific job of presenting. And I know you can find those through NTTAC, through their website, and you can also find it at shiftwellness.org. So I invite you to do that. And while you are at shiftwellness.org, we have a lot of other resources that you can take a look at. And you can always reach out to us if you have questions or if you would like some assistance from us. So thank you so much for being here today, and we look forward to presenting a really good webinar for you. I will turn it over to Carol, I believe.
All right. Thank you, Beth. This is Carol Brusca. I am the embedded mental health provider for the New Mexico ICAC. That means that I am the mental health person that all of our ICAC task force members can come to if they're struggling. A lot of what I do is educational for them, so I will train them on newest research. I will sit with them if they're struggling with signs and symptoms. I review some of the things that we're going to be going over today. I review those things with our ICAC as well. Typically, because we are a small state, I visit everyone, all of our ICAC and affiliates across the state at least once a year. COVID has kind of put a little bit of a damper on that, but we're trying to sort through that. And I love the work. I love being able to help people learn wellness tips and tools on how to stay well, because the work that is done by ICAC is so important, and I would like to support them in continuing to do that work as long as they would like. I also am work with an outreach program that works with the highest utilizers, and so in that process I'm working with a psychiatrist, and I'm working with therapists, and I'm working with law enforcement, working with probation officers, and across the board I have seen that when people are experiencing others' trauma, there's an opportunity for them to become vicariously traumatized and experience some of the things that we'll be talking about today. So even if you aren't working as a task force member of an ICAC, please know that the experiences that you have had by witnessing others' trauma could impact you in the same way that it could impact ICAC task force members. So hopefully you will learn something new today, and we are here to support you whatever way we can. Alan, go ahead and take it away.
Hello, my name is Alan Flora. I've been a law enforcement officer since 1992. I started as a deputy sheriff in a rural county in the mountains in North Carolina. In the first year, I was assigned to work specifically with serving domestic violence protective orders. Did about 100 in my first year. And I think doing that work led me to have a special place in my heart for people in abusive situations, and particularly women and children, which is what I dealt with the most. So throughout my career at the sheriff's office, I focused a lot on domestic disturbance issues and helping people in abusive situations. And then since 1998, I've been a special agent with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, worked a variety of crimes ranging from homicides, rapes, robberies, to fire investigation. But since 2007, I've been full-time with the ICAC task force. And since 2015, I've been fortunate to be the commander and leader of the North Carolina ICAC task force. So I have a variety of law enforcement experience, but in one way or another, most of it was connected to working with people in abusive situations, women, children, and others that were particularly victimized. And I think that's where my passion has been. But over time, I've also come to realize that that's taken a heavy toll on my life and the way I view things. So I became involved with the SHIFT program a few years ago, honestly, to get a better understanding of it for myself, how it affected me, and then got further involved to be able to share that information with others. And I will turn it back over to Carol, who will talk about our objectives today.
Great. So what we're going to cover today is we are going to, first we're going to introduce secondary trauma and traumatic stress. So if you haven't already heard those terms or you're not familiar with that, or even if you have some level of understanding, we're going to bring that up so that we are all on the same page with what we're talking about. So that's going to be our first step. We're going to talk about how the body responds to trauma and stress. So we know that trauma impacts us on all domains, like Beth was saying, and we're going to talk about how our body responds. We're going to talk about the emotional signs. So the emotional toll that traumatic stress and vicarious trauma can have on us. And then we're going to discuss the resiliency and provide tools and techniques to cope. So we're going to tell you the bad stuff, but we're going to wind up with the good stuff and how you can walk away today feeling better than you have because you've got some tools and techniques to use. So, Alan, go ahead.
So just to touch again on how the SHIFT program came about, it's geared towards the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. It was designed to support ICAC teams and affiliates who are chronically exposed to this material. But I would point out that it's not just for ICAC teams. The same concepts apply to anybody that's working with, seeing children who are being victimized or people in these traumatic situations. But it is specifically geared towards the ICAC task force teams to help understand what the exposure to this material can do to us, the long-term effects that it has on us, and how to mitigate some of those effects by understanding it and kind of getting control of it.
Okay, so what is secondary trauma? Secondary trauma, so we're going to talk about what a fight, flight, or freeze is, and then secondary trauma. So secondary trauma is different from the trauma that we would experience as an individual because obviously, as it implies here, secondary trauma means that it's coming from someone else. So if I experience a trauma myself, that would be the first trauma. But if I experience someone else's trauma, and that can be through hearing the story that they've told me or witnessing the trauma that I watched on a video or that I heard on an audio or that I saw in pictures, then I can become traumatized by that. So that would be considered secondary trauma. It can happen as like we talked about, as an Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force member, but it can also happen in other jobs as well. So if you're doing a job unrelated to traumatic material, if I am driving down the road and I see a car accident, I can become traumatized by watching that car accident even if I wasn't involved. So secondary trauma really relates to someone else's trauma that we witness, and whether that's by reading about it, by seeing it, by hearing the victim tell it, or by hearing someone else tell about that trauma, and then that person's trauma sticks with us and we can become traumatized. So, and I also want to talk a little bit about fight, flight, or freeze. So with the way we respond to trauma is typically by going into fight, flight, or freeze, because what happens is when we experience trauma or witness someone else's trauma, our reptilian part of the brain, which is the very basic part of our brain that's whole purpose is to save our life, that kicks in. And when that kicks in, the whole objective is to get us out of the situation safely and alive. Our logic goes offline, our fight, flight, freeze goes online, so the whole, like I said, the whole objective is to get us out of there safely. So when we go into fight, that means our brain thinks that we can fight our way out of the situation. When we go into flight, that means our brain feels like we can't really fight, but we can run away from the situation. And then when we go into freeze, then that means that our brain thinks that this is something that we cannot manage, so we will freeze because it's so overwhelming, and fight or flight are not an option. Now, recently, we've been hearing more and more about a fourth response, which is called FAWN, F-A-W-N. It's new to our, to what we're reading. It's kind of new to the literature, so there's not a lot of research on FAWN yet. But what we do know is this oftentimes would be more familiar to someone who is a victim. So with respect to someone who is secondarily experiencing someone's trauma, we could, the experience might not be as common as it would be if we were the victim. If we were the person that was experiencing the trauma, fawn might be our way of just kind of doing what we could to avoid conflict. So this might happen with a child in an abusive situation. This might happen in a domestic violence situation. Although I think that when we were talking the other day, Alan was saying that he feels that this can happen to professionals working with severe traumatic cases as well. Alan, did you want to fill us in?
Yeah, I just, for me, what I relate to when I think of the fawning is the stress that I have felt when I've observed it. So in the context of an ICAC task force investigator, unfortunately, what we do a lot of the time is review video images of child sexual exploitation. So I recall vividly, and I can tell you even when it was in the fall of 2009, I was doing an exam on a computer, and I came across a video that had children being abused, but they were laughing and giggling as they interacted with their abuser. Now that was something they had learned to do, I guess, to make the experience less upsetting. But for me, it was incredibly confusing because they were, in essence, using this people-pleasing strategy to make things more bearable for them. But I was very confused and upset by it, to the point where I had to just turn my computer off and walk away. And I was very confused that day and didn't really understand what I had seen. So we bring that up today in this context because it's important to understand that you may be stressed or bothered by witnessing fawning behavior in a victim and not really understand why you're seeing what you see. So we're going to talk about signs and symptoms today of emotional signs and symptoms and how to mitigate these things. When we talk about vicarious trauma, it has effects really in 5 domains: physical, cognitive, intellectual, emotional, relational, behavioral, and worldview. And today we're going to focus on the emotional signs and symptoms. But just understand that this might not affect everybody the same way. What has a more of an emotional effect on me might affect somebody else in a physical way. So just understand there are different signs and symptoms, and you can have a combination of those things. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And Carol, if you'll talk about symptoms.
Yep. So symptoms of chronic exposure, what we have learned over the years working with individuals, and what I have learned in my experience as a therapist who has been experiencing the trauma of others as part of my job, is that it's fairly easy to break these down into normal, warning, and trouble indicators if you're paying attention to what's going on in your body and your mind. So a normal response to chronic exposure might be something like you witnessed something, whether it was hearing someone's story, seeing a video, looking at images, and when you stopped doing that, then you didn't think about that anymore. So for instance, if I was talking to an individual and they told me their story, and then afterwards I left the room and met with someone else, and I didn't think about that person's story or what they told me or anything about that until they came back the next week to see me. Or if I was doing ICAC work and I was viewing images, and then when I closed that out so that I was doing another task, that didn't come back to me. So a warning indicator would be if I was working on a particular thing, whether it was hearing it, seeing it, looking, whatever way I was looking at this traumatic images, if I was viewing that and then intermittently the rest of the day, the rest of the week, that image kept coming up, or hearing that voice of the individual telling me the story kept coming up, or what my imagination had created when I heard the story keeps popping up. And it could be intrusive. So it could be something that I'm sitting down at dinner with my family and somebody mentions something and suddenly that pops up. Typically the reason that that pops up like that is because something that we heard secondarily traumatizing to someone, that will pop up related to the story. So for instance, when I was working with individuals with mental illness, there was one woman who had been raped, and the person that had raped her was in a red truck. So every time she saw a red truck, then that triggered her response of becoming traumatized. Well, she would talk about this each week, and then for me, when I would see the red truck, that would make me think of her. So this same type of thing can happen if we have been secondarily traumatized. We can be triggered by something that we witnessed in those images or that someone told us. And if it's intermittently or if it was mildly intrusive, then that's a warning sign that we need to really step up our resiliency skills and our practices so that we can get rid of the long-term effects. A trouble indicator could be where you have looked at something or heard someone's story and it just doesn't go away. So, or it could be that it's constantly disruptive or intrusive. So this experience was one that I had when I was working with a different rape victim, and she was telling me the story of the anniversary of one of her rapes, and it was really traumatic, and she was a great storyteller to my detriment. And she was telling me all about what had happened and how she responded. We came up with a plan on what we could do, and then what happened is she left the office, and normally, because in therapy school you learn to put things in a little box, normally my response would be to then have a clean slate for the next individual. Well, this time that didn't happen, and her story kept coming back to me, and it was very intrusive. So long story short, I was able to meet with my coworkers and not tell them about the trauma, but tell them about how I felt and work through that by using my resources of social connection, drinking some water to make sure I wasn't getting dehydrated, eating a nice lean snack, and then also by going for a walk, I was able to get through that and move forward. So, Alan, did you want to take it away?
All right, so we'll talk about some of the compounding factors. And so, it's bad enough that we deal with this trauma, but then you have other things that add to it and increase your stress levels, such as insufficient resources for ICAC teams. The most common insufficient resource I hear about is people. We don't have enough officers or agents assigned to work these cases. It is not uncommon for people at smaller agencies and even some large ones to be the sole person at their agency dealing with this. And that's honestly just not the best way to do it, but it's a fairly common thing, and that can be stressful. Compounding that also, many ICAC cases that never get investigated. Now, obviously, you want to investigate everything, but if you think in terms of the primary source of leads for ICAC teams are the cyber tips coming in from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And North Carolina, last year in 2019, we received 4,900 cyber tips. That was a record, far higher than we had ever dealt with before. We didn't think it was possible to get more than that. At the midpoint this year, thanks to COVID, we are over 4,600 halfway through the year, when our 4,900 was a record. I say that just because you can't possibly get to everything. So you end up having to triage things, and you only hope that you have enough. Sorry, I lost my slide there. Whoop. Oops, there we go. All right, sorry about that. Triaging cases, and ultimately that means that you're triaging victims. You have to make choices sometimes because you don't have enough people to cover it. So when you have those limits on the amount of things you can do, you're always afraid of missing a victim or missing something on a case that you triage out as being less important than the others. So overwhelmed professionals, again, there's a lack of understanding sometimes from the general public about what we do. So that can be stressful. And it's not like you can really explain everything. Sometimes you want to explain to people why you did something a certain way, but you can't do that without talking about either investigative techniques or about, without revealing something that the general public really isn't allowed to know or shouldn't know about. So you have that weighing on you. You got that responsibility on you to protect the community from somebody reoffending. There's also the daily contact with victims and offenders, which can be stressful. And then again, just that increased caseload because the numbers keep growing and you can't get to them all, and the offenses continue to be very severe. It's a lot to deal with. And Carol.
Yep. And so one of the things, I was looking at the audience questions, and there is a question here about appease. There's fight, flight, freeze, and appease. My understanding is that appease is very similar to fawn. It's it's trying to please or cooperating with the perpetrator or the offender. It's very similar to fawn. So like I said when I was talking about fawn, this is, in my understanding, a fairly new concept, and I think it relates oftentimes to victims experiencing trauma, but like Alan said, that it was very difficult for him when he saw someone, a victim of exploitation, displaying those signs. So yes, I think that that with victims, that certainly could be something that does happen. I think that it would make sense that if you can't fight your way out of the situation, if you can't run away, and if the best way to get out that is by joining with your perpetrator, that would be the thing that you do, because it's a matter of life or death situation. It's a safety mechanism. So I do believe that appease or fawning is definitely something that we will be learning more about as time progresses, because I do believe that it is something that's valid. We just need to have more information so we can actually have a sense of what that's like. So the signs and symptoms today for emotional stress reactions. So when I'm thinking about signs and symptoms of emotional stress, my thoughts are that the one that comes to mind for me is lack of joy and kind of sadness. So I think that you can certainly have emotional ups and downs. That can happen. You can certainly have anger or sadness. You can have fear. You can have loss of sense of humor. All of those things can certainly happen. But I think that when I think of the signs and symptoms that I experience as an emotional reaction, that would be feeling that I've lost my sense of joy. So when it occurs to me how awful things happen to people and it makes me very sad, or when I am witnessing the trauma around me, then that can make me feel a sense of losing my sense of joy. It can also make me feel kind of guilty that my life is, in my mind, pretty good, and there's so many out there that are suffering. So those are some of the signs and symptoms that that I am familiar with respect to emotional stress. And Alan? Okay, so we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And our next slide will be the poll question. So what is an emotional sign of traumatic stress that you have seen in yourself or others?
And for our audience members, you can type your answers into the box here where it says type your answer. We're having a little bit of a issue with the latency here in Adobe, and that folks may not see the poll question here, Carol. So would you mind if I just go back to the presentation here. And again, apologies for the latency issue that folks are experiencing in Adobe. We're attempting to work with Adobe and see what's happening right now.
Absolutely. No, we'll just jump in wherever you need us to. So go ahead.
Well, while we're doing that, I'll mention the increased irritability. I lost my audio for a minute there earlier. When we were talking about signs and symptoms, one of the signs and symptoms increased irritability. And I have been made aware by my wife that when I'm having a particular stressful time, I tend to be a little bit short with the children. Just shorter attention span, shorter patience, shorter whatever. It's not something that's intentional, but I think it happens when I'm under extreme stress, and I'm not even always aware of it until somebody points it out to me.
And I think, Alan, that's a very common sign and symptom. I think that oftentimes it's not just you, Alan, I promise. Many of us, when we start to feel stressed out or overwhelmed, or when we start to take on the trauma of someone else, our first reaction happens to be some irritability. So we can become irritable, and then oftentimes who we lash out on is our family and the people that are closest of. It's like that song, "You Always Hurt the One You Love," and unfortunately, that's the people that we normally lash out at. So you are not alone, Alan, in your feeling, but we'll give you some tools and techniques today, Alan, that can help you out. So some of the things that you can do to relieve your emotional stress, I would say that you can try to, I'm just going to go ahead and go on to the next slide if I can. Yes. So I guess we're just going to not try the poll question, William, or can we try it?
Yeah, we can give it a try again, and let's see what occurs. I'm going to switch over now.
Okay, so what this question relates to is, what are the things that when you are having an emotional stress response? So if you're like Alan and feeling irritable, if you're like me and feeling sad or loss of joy, or whatever else you might be feeling, whether you're feeling angry, if you're having mood swings, sad, fear, and worry, what are the things that you do to relieve those emotional stress responses? What do you do when you're feeling emotional about your work related to secondary trauma? What do you do to make yourself feel better?
Carol, looks like the poll question may be experiencing disruption due to the latency. How about I switch us back over to the main presentation, and we can have folks to type in their answers into the chat here. Apologies about that, everyone.
Well, we can do it. Sounds good. So please, in the chat, if you would let us know some of the things that you do to relieve your emotional stress. So when you, like I said, when you're feeling mood swings, angry, irritable, sad, confused, maybe you're feeling worried, what are the things that you do to help yourself feel a little bit better? Okay. And I'm not seeing any replies yet, so I'm not sure if there are replies or they're just not popping up. So I'm just going to go ahead because it looks like there's either people are trying to respond and we're not getting those responses down, or, oh, we've got multiple. Okay, so the things that people are experiencing is brain fog, anxiety, withdrawal, disrupted sleep, changes in eating habits, and now I've lost the chat, so I'm not sure what how people are responding. So those are all what you're experiencing, and then if you could just please let us know about what you're doing as your to relieve that stress. So when you're having the emotional stress symptom, for instance, when we're experiencing someone's trauma and maybe we get tearful because, like I said, we are triggered by what we're seeing and we become tearful, or maybe we become very sad because we're being triggered and it makes us very sad. Like Alan said, that we can become irritable, so we can be very mad that these kind of things are taking place, or what happens is we don't know how to manage this or put it in its place, or we don't know how to deal with it, and so we lash out and become angry. All of those things are very, very common emotional responses, and the worst part about those is they seem to take us off guard. So when we least expect it, then we, out of the blue, we'll feel really angry, or we'll lash out, or we'll start crying when we don't know why we're crying, or we might feel sad all of a sudden. So our day is going along just well, and then we think about something that we saw or witnessed, and then we begin to get very sad and teary. So all of those are definitely some responses that you might have. And so someone was talking about irritability and yelling. Absolutely. So you know what? Cleaning is absolutely one of the stress reduction tools that I use. For me, I see that someone was saying cleaning. Cleaning works because if it feels like the rest of my life is out of control, if I can at least control my environment, then I can have a sense of control. So disconnect and lack of emotions, that's absolutely correct. So we can, when we get to that point where our emotions are feeling overwhelmed, we can kind of disconnect, and we can then kind of numb out. So then things that used to affect us don't affect us anymore in a positive way. So if we used to go to our child's soccer games and enjoy that whole process, it could be that we no longer find joy in that. It could be that that other things are that we can yell at people, we can become sad. So some of the things that we can do to counterbalance those, and I'm seeing that someone's talking about yoga, meditation, praying, disconnecting from electronics. It could be singing. Singing is a wonderful activity because it will increase the oxytocin, which is considered the feel-good hormone. So all of those things are going to be really beneficial. Breathing techniques, so if you're doing some deep breathing, that's going to get some oxygen to your brain. It's going to take you out of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or appease, and it's going to bring you back to the logical side of your brain to help you move forward. Some people are talking about playing video games or swimming. I've seen some really great responses. It's really great responses on how everyone is managing their emotional stress. So meditating, jogging, yeah, great ideas. The reason that some of the things that you're talking about work is because they help us to decrease the cortisol in our system. So if you are out jogging outdoors, that's going to be beneficial because you're going to be getting rid of the cortisol, and then if you're outside jogging, you're going to be seeing the beautiful trees around you, you're going to be seeing the blue sky, hearing the birds, getting in some fresh oxygen. So all of those things are going to be beneficial. If you're doing something like cooking, again, that's going to be great because you're positively impacting your five senses. So any of those activities that you can do to pull in your five senses to counterbalance anything that might trigger you is going to be beneficial. So I see lots of people walking and exercising, which is always great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and great responses. Obviously, you all are doing some wonderful things. So hopefully, sounds like you're able to work through your, you've got some good skills in place. So some of the stress reduction tools that we're going to talk about is adapt. So one of the things is, how can you adapt to the situation? What can you do to the stressor that you, so that you can accept and adapt that this is that's happening. So if I have experienced some vicarious trauma, what can I do to reframe that, to adapt, to accept that that is what it is, and yet move on? So I know that the nature of my work, if I'm an ICAC worker, is to look at exploitation materials. And so how can I adapt and realize that it's going to impact me emotionally, and because I know it's going to impact me emotionally, I will have a plan in place so that I can positively impact myself, and that doesn't have a long-term effect. Also breathing, like several people said, breathing. So doing some deep belly breathing gets that oxygen to your brain. It's going to help you think more clearly. It's going to help release that cortisol. It's going to really help you move through and get you back to status quo and give you that sense of control again. Reframing the situation is a good thing to do. So think in terms of, I'm feeling really upset today out of the blue because of my work, but I recognize that the work I'm doing is very important. And so when I become upset, I have some tools in place that I can use to get through that, and so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then having gratitude, having a sense of gratitude and understanding that that we have a lot to be grateful for. When we have gratitude, keeping a gratitude journal or just out loud talking about our things that we're grateful for, again, that can increase the oxytocin, which is the feel-good hormone in our body, and really it does change how we feel. So I tell people all the time, if we look at the negative side of things, then we will see the negative side of things. So if I wake up in the morning and I stub my toe and I think, wow, this is going to be a bad day, my brain is automatically going to look for bad things to happen to validate what I've seen. By that same token, if I can turn that around and I can be grateful for what I have and then look for things to validate that, then I will be having a more positive day. I'll increase my oxytocin and I can move forward. And then remember why. You know, whatever your career is, remember what inspired you to get into your work in the first place. More than likely, for the most of the people on here, it was related to doing something positive for your community. So when you're having a rough day, think about that excitement, that enthusiasm that you had for your job when you first started, and then see if you can reach back and have those same feelings and then try to move forward. So some stress reduction tools that you can use. These are some quick resets. So this will help you get your emotions back online in a very quick way. The first one is breathe in for 5 counts. So what this says is you want to take a slow, deep breath in, and then you hold it for 5 counts, and then you hold it for 5 counts, and then you exhale for 5 counts, and then you pause. And if you can do this on a regular basis, it will become a habit. And then whenever you're feeling anxious, stressed, angry, agitated, sad, you can use this as the technique for getting yourself back to reset, and then you'll feel better. So again, if you wanted to try this right now, it's just a matter of breathe in for a count of 5, hold for a count of 5, exhale, pause, and then repeat. So why does breathing help? The reason that breathing is going to help is because if you're doing deep breathing through your belly, it's going to get the oxygen where it needs to be, as opposed to thoracic breathing, which is in your upper chest. If you're doing upper chest breathing, your breathing is more shallow. You're not getting the oxygen where it needs to be. So the oxygen and carbon dioxide levels are not balanced out, and you don't get the benefits of that deep breath. And it's not calming in the way that it would be if you're doing belly breathing. So when you do breathing in your upper chest, which is very common for us to do when we're feeling anxious or nervous or angry, what's going to happen is we're going to get increase in heart rate. There's potential for dizziness, muscle tension, and other physical consequences. If we have the ability to really stop when we notice our shoulders are getting tense, or when we notice that we might be getting a little bit lightheaded, or our breathing is, our heart rate is increasing, if we can stop and breathe all the way down from the belly, use the breathing we just talked about, more oxygen is getting to your brain, and then you're going to have a decrease in the heart rate and your anxiety, which is going to bring you back to the process of being able to think clearly and get out of the current situation. I think, Alan, you had something you wanted to add?
I'll just add this about deep breathing, and it kind of goes back to so many things in life. When it gets complicated, we go back to basics, and things that worked a long time ago can still work now. In my experience, I mentioned that for the first part of my career, I worked as a deputy sheriff back in the early 90s. One of the many jobs I did was to work with the DARE program, where I actually went in and taught 5th grade students how to resist drugs and avoid violence and how to handle the stressors that they were dealing with at that point in their life. Deep breathing was one of the things that we taught in that class. So we would actually practice the breathing in and breathing out and do the deep breathing exercises in class. And I would encourage the kids to do that when they had stressful situations. And many times I would have students that I would go in there once a week, and they would come in and tell me, you know, in the weeks afterwards, how they had used that in stressful situations, and it helped them to kind of calm down and get a better feel for things.
And so, I mean, and that's something that we can all do. It takes no equipment. We are breathing throughout the day. There's never a time when you're not breathing. So that's a great thing to just pull in. But the key here is to make a practice of it, because if you make a practice of it, then it will be what comes to us naturally. So other stress reduction tools, reset emotions using a gratitude exercise. So the thing that's important about all of these exercises is the more we can do these together with other individuals, then we can connect with them, and we know that from the research that connecting with others is the most important thing we can do with respect to our resilience. So if we can start a practice of a gratitude exercise within our family, with our partner, maybe even with our coworkers, and we can think about, we can have a challenge in the office. You know, everybody do an email at the end of the day. What are 3 things that went well today? Or maybe we do a challenge around the dinner table. We all sit around and talk about what are 3 things that made me smile? What are 3 things that I enjoyed? What is something that I'm looking forward to tomorrow? So if we can keep that gratitude attitude going, that can help us, again, look for the positive. And the more we can bring in our supports, whether that's our family, our friends, our coworkers, any social supports that we have, the more we can bring those in, the better it's going to be, because that connection is key for resilience. When we have that connection with others, that will now remind us that we have the support, and so we don't feel like we're alone, and we feel like we can lean on someone else, and that's going to help us with our de-stressing. So why is it that gratitude helps? Well, gratitude is going to help because it's going to be, like I said previously, if we're focused on the positive, there's less opportunity to focus on the negative. And then, you know, focusing on the gratitude can lighten up parts of our brain that are associated with reward and motivation. So when we're doing that, that means that if I'm focusing on what I'm grateful for, if I'm thinking about the wonderful hug that I got from my child, if I'm thinking about I'm so grateful that I got to go to Hawaii, all of those things, those positive thoughts we can have, the thoughts of gratefulness, those will literally light up the parts of our brain associated with reward and motivation, which then encourages us to do those things again, but it also gives us a break from the stressors that we're feeling, and it gives us the opportunity to really take a step back, relax for a moment, and rethink how we're feeling. And again, feeling grateful is going to release the oxytocin. So I've talked about that several times today, that the oxytocin is the hormone that is considered the feel-good hormone. It's considered the connection hormone. So when we release oxytocin, it's one of the jobs of oxytocin is to make us reach out to someone else. So when we're feeling stressed, we want to reach out to someone else because that connection is going to support us in feeling better. Alan?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so statement of purpose, basically. Sorry, our slides seem to be jumping around. Get back there. Okay, thank you. So there's a statement or a quote from Mark Twain: "The 2 most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why." Now, there are many people, obviously, who go through the whole life questioning why, but some of us are fortunate enough to feel as if we found our purpose. I know an experience for me that was absolutely life-changing, and it's probably the same thing for a lot of people, but that was the day that I became a parent. I remember very clearly that first moment holding my newborn son 17 years ago, thinking, this is why I'm on the earth. That for me was my reason. I think a lot of what I do with my job, my focus on protecting children, in many ways connects back to the love that I have for my own children and how much it means to me to protect them and what I would expect from others to look out for them, and I want to give the same thing back.
So
And Carol, you'll talk about resiliency.
Yep, I'm going for it.
Okay.
So what are the benefits for resiliency? It will help us when we apply the skills that we've talked about, so when we apply the skills of reaching out to others, when we apply the skills of taking a moment to breathe, when we apply the skills of surrounding ourselves with gratitude, when we apply the skills of getting outside to breathe in some fresh air, to get a new perspective on our surroundings, when we apply all these skills, this is going to help us increase, it's going to help us increase our understanding of our purpose. It's going to increase our ability to have perspective. It's going to help with our core values. So we're going to really have an opportunity to think about what are the things that are important to me and how can I focus on those. And then it reminds us that we can persevere and that we can get through this and that we can continue on. So when we practice these skills, we have the ability to be connected with others, to be emotionally more stable. We have the ability to breathe through those difficult times. We have the opportunity to discuss with others what's going on with us so we can have that emotional connection and that oxytocin in our brain that's going to make us feel better. And then all of those things together will help us persevere. They'll help us understand what our core values are and how we can look at what our purpose is and how we can really focus on what's important to us. So like Alan said, he realized his purpose was to be a father to his children. We can all figure out what our purpose is as well. So we have a third poll question. I think if everyone could just please try to answer in the chat so we don't have to take time away trying to figure out the poll thing. So if everyone can just see if you can answer what are the, and I lost that again. Let's see. What is the one new tool or technique you learned about today to relieve emotional stress? So is there anything that you learned or is there anything that you would like to add that is a tool or technique that you are using currently? Okay, so what I hear is deep breathing. It's keeping a gratitude journal. It's focusing. So somebody was talking about keeping a gratitude journal is really helpful for them. There's someone else that says their Apple Watch reminds them to breathe. So all of these are perfect. Someone says dumping their ideas on paper, it's releasing the stress. That's a great technique. So being able to write something down, your brain no longer has to hold it. And if your brain no longer has to hold it, then you can think about other things. So I encourage people to do that at night before they go to bed, just to write things down, to dump it from their brain. If you are have the opportunity before you go home from work, then write all those things down that you need to do for the next day, and then your brain won't have to carry that with you. So writing things down is a wonderful way to really get that out, whether it's a positive thing that you want to get out in respect to a gratitude journal, or whether it's just dumping something so your brain doesn't have to think about it. So let's see. So I'm seeing something here. Go ahead.
Carol, let me add this too, and I'm kind of backtracking a little bit, but one of the things that I think has been the most helpful in my life was actually recognizing the vicarious trauma, the stress that I was dealing with. That may seem like an odd point to put at the end of the show, but I think it is important. You've got to recognize it first. If you don't do that, you can't deal with it. I know in my own life and career for many years, as I said, I focused on these jobs that, children were in danger or, domestic violence victims. I always felt like, these were the most desperate cases. These are the ones that needed me the most. So that's what I put my focus on. I think it was many years of doing that before I actually understood the effect that it was having on me. I didn't recognize that stress, so I didn't properly deal with it. It manifested in other ways. But, a huge part of managing your stress is acknowledging, accepting, admitting that you're dealing with it.
Right, exactly. That's a great point, Alan. So I'm trying to see, so I'm seeing some deep breathing here, gratitude journal. You know, that someone was talking about encouraging the victim to work with to keep a journal. So yes, these the journal ideas, all of the things that we're learning here are not just for you on this webinar. These are things that we can take home with us and use with our family. These are things we can use depending on what your line of business is, who you're working with. You can use these if you're a probation officer. You can use these with the individuals you're working with, or if you're working with victims, you can use these skills as well. Because, I mean, certainly all of us have the opportunity to become emotionally overwhelmed, and if we can use these skills to make things better, that will be the best thing we can do. So Sarah says about learning about yourself. So if you are a highly sensitive person, this can help you make sense of your emotional experiences. The more we have the opportunity to make sense of what we're experiencing, the better it will be with respect to being able to identify what's going on with us. And that's why I always say to people, pay attention to what's going on in your body and what's going on emotionally, because that will give you the indicators of what the next steps are. So I know we've only got about less than 5 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Let's see if we've got, yeah, my slides aren't going forward now. So are there any questions that anybody has at all about the presentation, about anything we talked about? I know that it's been kind of wonky here, so please let us know if you have any questions. Yes.
Hi, it's Beth. So maybe let's talk a little bit about why connection is so important. I think one of the points that has been brought up is that we might not often see the differences in our emotional responses personally. So can you talk about why that connection piece is so important? Because it's often the people that are closest to us that notice the changes.
Absolutely. And I talked about connection, but not in that way, because yes. So absolutely. So when I was talking about connection, I talked about how important it is to have people in your life, but I didn't talk about how important it is to have them in your life, because not only are they there for you as a support, but they're also there as your guide to kind of say, you know, it seems like you're a little bit off today. It seems like you're a little bit more sad or a little bit more irritable. Like Alan said, his wife noticed that he would become irritable, so she's kind of his weather vane. So it's important to have that kind of relationship and that communication. And what I encourage people to do is, when you have a job that that exposes you to highly toxic relationship or highly toxic situations, whether that's ITAC or something else along that line, make sure that you sit down with those people that are close to you and get a commitment from them that you can have an open and honest conversation when they see something that's changing in you. And the reason it's important to have that conversation is because you might not notice that you're experiencing things like irritability, like mood swings, like sadness, and someone who is either working with you or living with you or close to you might see those things. And they can help to catch it in the beginning, as opposed to ignoring it and waiting until things get to the point where they're much worse for you. So have those conversations with those people that are closest to you to say, you know, let's make a commitment. And you can certainly do that with your spouse if they're not doing this type of work. Have the conversation with your spouse or your friends or your family. When I see this kind of behaviors in you, this indicates to me that there's a lot of stress going on. So how do we want to deal with that? What's the plan we're going to come up with? And how are we going to support you or support me through this situation? So coming up with that, writing it down is even better, but just having that conversation, so then there can be the ability to support you through those difficult times.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Carol. And one thing we talk about a lot, and when we do our full day training with ICAC teams, is possibly choosing a code word, something that when you come home from work and you've had a really hard day, that there is some way that you can express to the people closest to you that it's been a tough day. Like for me, occasionally when my husband and I will check in together in a day, if I've had a really rough day, sometimes I will just I will text him the poop emoji just so he knows where I'm at that day, how my day has been. And so it just sort of makes the transition into our family life, and it gives him sort of a heads up so that we can help one another transition from tough days.
And I think that's a great suggestion. I think that we've only got about 25 seconds, so William probably wants to jump in. But please contact us if you have any kind of questions at all. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here today.
All right, great.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you all. And I appreciate everyone being patient during the latency issues that we've experienced here in our Adobe Connect system. We have contacted them and to let them know. But because of latency issues, what we will do is make sure that this recording is loaded to our NTTAC YouTube page as soon as possible. So again, thank you all for your time and bearing with all of the tech issues that we've experienced today. Just a couple of reminders. Please don't forget that you can contact NTTAC at the contact information located on this slide. You can contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk on the contact information on this slide. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? Well, if so, please reach out to the TTA 360 platform through OJJDP at the email address here, tta360.ojjdp.ojp.gov. Again, this webinar will be recorded and placed on our YouTube page. We will look to get it up a little earlier than normal because of the tech issues we've experienced in the Adobe Connect platform. Please take a few minutes to review this disclaimer. For those who may not be able to see it, okay, just note the disclaimer does mention that the opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in the program are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. All right, a little bit of a delay again here. All right, and just the final reminder is to let you all know that we do have some upcoming events with SHIFT. We have the last two in our series set for July 16th and for July 24th. And if you'd like to get the registration information for each of these, feel free to reach out to OJJDP TTA. The TTA Help Desk, and we'll be more than happy to provide you all information about both of these webinars, including any necessarily links or information. I'm going to try to pull up the last poll question here that we have to see if it will work at all. And nope, looks like it is not. So with that being said, I will bid everyone a good afternoon. Again, apologies for the interruption that we've experienced the Adobe Connect platform, but again, we will have this webinar uploaded sooner onto our YouTube page so that you all can review it.